Welcome to Legal Nurse Podcast, and I have today with me an experienced legal nurse consultant, Dr. Rachel Cartwright Vanzant. She is based in Florida, and she is a president of the Medical Legal Concepts, has been a legal nurse consultant and a risk management expert for over 37 years. She has her doctorate in public policy and public administration with a focus on law and public safety. And she also runs an annual summit for legal nurse consultants and nurses who are exploring the field. Rachel, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Pat.
What I would love to do is to have you talk with me today about some of the concepts associated with medical records, because they are so important to our work as legal nurse consultants. To be able to interpret and analyze medical records is the core of what we do. And I know when you and I first talked about this show, we thought we should really concentrate on documentation, since it forms the foundation of trying to determine what happened, particularly in medical malpractice cases. So let's start with, what is one of the constants associated with documentation? One of the things that about documentation that never seems to change.
Well, when your care is being scrutinized, the only way that you can determine whether things were done right or things were left out and not done right that causes, either a poor outcome or an adverse event is how well the documentation is. So when care is being scrutinized, many times in a litigation situation or in the review part of that, you're actually seeing that you may have good documentation of bad care, or you have poor documentation of good care. And so it's kind of hard to find right in the middle where it is that you need to be. So as healthcare providers, and this includes all nurses or nurse practitioners, PAs, physicians, anybody who puts medical record information in the chart, regardless of whether it's handwritten or electronic, it needs to be complete to tell the story so that your documentation accurately reflects the care that you provide. And we're assuming that's going to be high quality care.
And the legal nurse consultants who are listening to this show might be working clinically, but for the most part, they are like you and I, trying to figure out what happened after the fact, piecing it together. You bring up an interesting point that I talked with attorneys about all the time when I testified as an expert witness, and we would focus on documentation. If the care was really good and the documentation was poor, most of the time we wouldn't be in the courtroom. It seemed to be when the documentation was poor and the care was poor that it created the most trouble and the most difficulty for people like you and people like legal nurse consultants who are puzzling over what went on. Did they follow the standard of care? Did they try to prevent this problem? What did they do after it occurred? Can you give us some insight on that piece? And maybe we'll start by, let's hold that question for a minute and come back to that, because somebody listening to this sees you as saying, well, she's got her own company. Well, how did you get into this? This is not a specialty area of nursing that a lot of people know about. So somehow 37 years ago or more, you got an introduction to this world. How did that happen?
Well, it kind of, and you're right, it did kind of evolve over time. And many of you start when you're getting into nursing, you either started at the associate level or the baccalaureate level, or maybe you were an LPN before and you moved from that track, or a nurse's aide. Regardless of how we got into our profession as a nurse, once you get exposed to the profession and you get involved in your bedside care or critical care or ER, or maybe your outpatient or pediatrics, you find areas where you kind of are drawn to because you find a little more interest in that, or maybe you become a little bit more seasoned in an area and you're just like, well, isn't there a little bit more that I want to do? Or maybe I want to get involved in leadership, or what happened to me is I wanted to get more involved in the quality aspect, because it just was really intriguing to me when we had to collect all the data on the floors, and you had to analyze it and compile it and draw a conclusion. I mean, my hand was up first to say, I want to do that. Now, some nurses would say you're crazy, but I really liked that part of it. I just thought it was really cool to see how data reflected the care that we did. And that was, I think, kind of the beginning of where I went down another track, essentially, because I became very interested in quality, became very interested in the surveys that were happening with the hospitals that would come in to make certain that we were delivering high quality of care. And that was not only from the state, but it was also from the government, because you can get money back from the government if you deliver quality of care. So you had surveys, inspections, and standards that you had to meet. And then you had your professional associations that would also set expectations for what they expected out of their individual specialties. And so that was just really an inspiring area for me to go into. Once I kind of got into that area, I thought, you know what, this is really kind of cool. I wanted to be the risk side, because at that point hospitals were beginning to be exposed, but were beginning to be known for having errors in care that were being more publicly known. So they were exposed kind of in that way, which is a risk side. So when I began to work with compliance areas and realized that risk exposure was very important at preventing injury or adverse events, then I just thought that was really cool. So then I went into becoming more educated as a licensed healthcare risk manager, because we have to be licensed where I live here. At least we used to. And so from that point, you begin to touch different people in different arenas. You are in touch with attorneys, you're in touch with risk management, you're in touch with executive leaders. And so your contacts are more broad. I began to speak a little bit more with nurses in the community and hospital organizations, kind of sharing with them what I was learning all of these years. Where legal nurse consulting came in was about 18 years ago, and it was like, wow, that's really what I want to do. And it wasn't that I wasn't doing it before, it's just kind of put it all in a nice little package, that this is kind of what you do. And so, I got some training in order to do that, which was extremely helpful. But then you have to apply it to your own personal style, where your commitment is, what your resources are. And that was the springboard for me to becoming more proficient at working as a legal nurse consultant where I am today. So I know that was a little bit of a long story, but it just kind of evolves. And I think everybody does. As you mature in your professional career, you will evolve. And there's not always a point in time that says, I'm changing. It just kind of happens as you mature and grow in your profession.
And it sounds like for you, it was a combination of experiences and training, and also personality type, because there's a lot of analysis in legal nurse consulting. There's a lot of being able to sift through facts and figures and details to be organized. My husband and I laugh about this because we had an opportunity to stand side by side in the kitchen organizing some section of the cabinet. And I said, isn't this fun? And he said, oh, I can't wait for this to be over. You have to like being able to solve puzzles and put information together to be good at this field. And you've certainly seen huge changes in documentation. Nothing is static in healthcare. You entered a point in your nursing career where the charts were structured very differently than they are now. What are some of the major challenges that you face right now when it comes to interpreting medical records?
Well, it is true that, over the years, particularly in the last 10 to 15 years, the medical record format has changed significantly. We, at first were pretty much handwritten medical records, and then we began to have a hybrid, which you have certain parts of the medical record are handwritten, and then you have the electronic pieces of that. And if you were in an organization that, could fund I like to call the Cadillac of the electronic medical record, or the Rolls Royce of the electronic medical record, then you had everybody electronic. But not every hospital or institution was able to fund that. So we still see today hybrid records where you have a part is electronic and part is handwritten. So that just in itself creates more of a challenge in organizing medical records, particularly not only for us to review them, but when you're trying to prepare for a deposition or go to trial, you have two different formats that you need to work with. And to get your fingers on those timely, quickly, is sometimes very hard to do because they're not stored in the same place. One of the other things that happens with the electronic records is that if you're working in a tertiary care center and they have a different scope of service, let's say they got neonatal intensive care unit, they have peds, they have burns, they have trauma. So you can see it's a wide spectrum. Not all electronic medical record vendors provide the documentation platform for all of those scope of services. So you may have in a large institution 2 or 3 vendors in the same institution that don't talk to each other. And that is very challenging because then you're trying to learn the different platforms and still trying to interpret the medical records. So I'm not saying that everyone is like that, but you will. If you do this long enough, you will encounter some of those things. So when you're in an electronic medical record, one of the biggest things I think is so important in organizing that is having the right technology on your system in order to manage electronic medical records. And that does take a little bit of an investment to understand what makes your life easier as opposed to taking a lot of time. Because then you have to be kind of cautious about what your billing structure is. If you don't have the latest technology, it may take you twice as much time to do the same amount with technology that you have. And that's just part of running your integrity in your business. On what do I need to be efficient in my business? So when we look at electronic medical records today, I'd say probably the most challenging thing out of all of them is trying to get the duplicates out. Because a lot of times when we get electronic medical records on a disk or a CD, or they're just now importing through a Dropbox or a share file, and it's an electronic system like a large file that transfers for us, we have to go through and try and find the duplicates. Well, finding duplicates in an electronic medical record that may be 2,000 or 3,000 pages long, you're going one page at a time, and you can't really tab them like we did with Post-it notes and just pull those later. You have to figure out a way to take them out and put the others in. So you have to find your own little way of doing that, but you have to understand how to work with the electronic medical records. And then you develop your style and how do you separate them? How do you clump them together? How do you note them so that you're not really deleting them, but you're putting them aside electronically? And it takes a little while. It's a little bit of a learning curve in order to refine your business as you change, but you have to also accept the fact that your business is always going to change if you want to stay busy.
And what software do you use to accomplish what you're describing?
Several things. Adobe Acrobat Pro is probably the most efficient thing that I can speak to that deals with PDF documents, because Adobe Acrobat Pro will allow you to optical character recognize those documents. And what that does is it searches them. And I don't know technically what it does, but it goes through every page. And at the end, you click save. And what it does is allows you to search for keywords. So if I'm searching for a fall in 3,000 pages of a long-term care facility, I type in FALL and it searches those 3,000 pages and highlights every time the word fall comes up. And I'm like going, great. Now you have to be a little cautious with that, because if you do have the hybrid ones in there, it doesn't read those. But at least it gives you a starting point where then you can work your way out to see what things led up to it, what didn't, what did we do right, what could we have done better, those type of things. It helps you narrow it down by using that. It also allows you to search for key defendants or those individuals that are we think may be associated with an adverse event. And so you can search by name to see every single place that that individual recorded care in the medical record. And that's critical, for attorneys wanting to see where's all the documentation for this nurse or this doctor or this PA. You can do it that way. That's very, very helpful. So Adobe Acrobat Pro is one of the best tools that I have. It was a little pricey getting in, but you know, you have it once and it's yours. You just update it. The other tool that I use is Casemap, and it's a suite. And Casemap allows you to do your chronologies, and your chronologies is you can do it in Word and it doesn't cost you a dime. Or as you get a little bit more efficient and you invest back in your business, then you invest in tools that help you do your role better. So Casemap is one of those things that I have used. I use the suite, and it's put out by LexisNexis.
Yep.
And what it does is allows you to just put in date and time. And so let's say the event happened 2 years ago. It will automatically tell you, was that a Tuesday or a Monday or a Saturday? Because that can be critical too. If the event happened on a weekend, then you're automatically thinking staffing. So there's certain things that it helps you do as far as giving you a day associated with the time. Plus, you can go through a section of the medical records and just type in what it is that you need to do, and then you hit one function key and it automatically pre-sorts it. So you're not putting insert above, insert below, insert above, insert below. I mean, that just takes a lot of time, drives you nuts. So that program is essential. Plus, you can filter. You filter on this program as well, because if you're going for a deposition and you want to talk with Mary Sue RN, then I filter everything that Mary Sue RN has. I print out a report, and this is what we go to depo with. So there are tools out there that you know, you certainly are available to us as legal nurse consultants to help us be the professionals that we want to be. And some of it does have to take a little of investment up front, but then it's a maintenance after that. And you just have to decide for yourself when that time has come to invest and then maintain, because it does take a little while to create that kind of revenue stream that you have what you were ready to invest in and then move forward. But then you jump here, you know, your business will then take a leap. So the technology is the easy part now.
I'm laughing because I frequently get into conversations with people who tear their hair out over technology. And it certainly can be a wonderful aid, and it can also be a source of frustration at times.
Yeah. Well, it is true, because I remember going through those trying times, and it's like you have to just embrace it and say, if this is where I'm going, I have to learn to do this. And then sometimes it's just it becomes like a little silly, because like that's all I had to do was those two things. It's like, oh my gosh, that was so silly. You'd be so upset. So sometimes it is pretty silly, you know.
It is. And it sounds like you have mastered significant portions of technology. I do remember starting with Word, doing chronologies, and then investing in Casemap as time went on, and finding that I loved the ability to do a real easy search and replace, so that I could, you know, if it was Dr. Leonard and his name was appearing over and over again, it's painful to have to type that name multiple times in a chronology, but you could put Dr. L, and then the search and replace would fix all those instances. You mentioned getting ready for depositions, getting ready for, or sorting through records. Do you do both behind the scenes consulting as well as expert witness work?
I do. I do. The majority of my business is behind the scenes, working with attorneys, and then I do teaching with the college, and you know, I teach out in the public sector. But as far as legal work, the majority of it is what we would call behind the scenes for attorneys, and that's doing all the case development side. You know, doing all with, you know, the stuff that takes a lot of time, finding the expert witnesses, putting the records together, getting the chronologies, getting the blurb in for the complaint when it's getting ready to go out. I mean, all those little pieces that go in, which we are invaluable for, to put that together, because we understand the medicine and the flow and the terminology and how it makes sense. So that is, you know, really kind of a good part. My expert work that I do, I still do a fair amount of those on falls and wounds. Primarily because the geographical location where those happen, the care is the same. So it could be in a hospital setting, in a long-term care facility, in an LTAC, but wounds are wounds and falls are falls. So you have the piece and the standard of care that goes around that. So I get called quite a bit to do those type of things, and a little bit for the compliance administrative piece. I'll get called to review things like that. So I do some, and I have testified in court before. I've done, quite a few depositions. So I feel like I know that area as well.
When you think about electronic medical records, circling back to that, I've encountered a lot of attorneys and many healthcare providers who express a mixture of gratitude that they can read the record and frustration over the volume of information that's produced, and the difficulty of putting in narrative notes if there's an incident. Sometimes filling in those fields doesn't tell us enough. Have you found those similar experiences, or any tricks or shortcuts or guidance for somebody who might be tearing their hair out over electronic medical records?
As far as doing the chronology part?
Sure, we can start with that.
Yeah. Well, when you're reviewing the records and you come to a gap, or maybe the documentation is not as complete as you were expecting it to be, you have to look at it through two lenses. You look at it in one and saying, okay, did the nurse fail to do something or not do something she should have done? Or is this just an example of poor documentation of good care? And so in order to try and figure that out, you need to see what the outcome is. Now, the reason why care and documentation as a whole is important like that, for sure, for the entire record, but it's also extremely important for individual nurses, because that's what keeps you out of litigation. You may have a poor outcome in a case, but it had nothing to do with me. But you may be so closely related to the event that we can't single you out because you have poor documentation of good care. So you get pulled in and you have to go through the depositions, you have to ask the questions, and then lo and behold, we find out, she really doesn't have anything to do with this, or he didn't have anything to do with this, and we let that person out. Where you could have avoided all of that had your documentation been more thorough and complete with respect to you. So, individually, we all have a duty to record the care that we do, and record the quality of care that we provide. If we don't do that, then we're exposed for potential litigation. Not necessarily that we've done something wrong, but you will be asked questions if the care is scrutinized and you happen to be too close to the event. So that's why it's real important for us as individual nurses to do that. Now, when you're writing that kind of a report for an attorney, I put that information in there, like in a comment section or an aside, because I look at it from both angles and say that, the consistency of this nurse in previous shifts that she was, it doesn't match up with what they're alleging she had done. Now, that's one theory, okay? You have to look at the other theory. Well, maybe she just was not on spot that day, and she really did forget to do things. So you have to look at both of those, and then the comment side, you put both of those theory analyses on the side, and then you wait to get more information through either deposition or discovery or reading other documents or looking at policies, and then you can begin to weed things out. But you have to keep your perspective open. Even though you may be working for the defense or the plaintiff, you look from both views.
And that's an interesting point. Many inexperienced legal nurse consultants explicitly need help figuring out how the other side is going to respond to the facts of the case. When I train legal nurse consultants how to write reports and screening reports, I ask them to include a section of they're screening the case for the plaintiff attorney, but I want them to say, this is what I anticipate the defense would say. How are they going to view the case so that their plaintiff attorney client is forewarned about the weaknesses in the case? And I think one of the challenges with electronic medical records is that even though they provide tons of data, sometimes they lack in tons of information. And that may make a strong case weaker because we just can't find it in the medical record, that key fact or that key set of of interventions were carried out because of the way that the records are structured. Have you seen any improvement in electronic medical records in the time that you've started to use them to deal with some of the weaknesses in the system?
Yes, you do see improvements in them. And again, it kind of depends on the vendor and it depends on the organization, because each vendor has their stage of platform that they purchased. So certain things will have bonuses and then others will have all the bells and whistles. So it kind of depends at that level too. You have to play a factor in that. But they're also listening to their customers, the hospitals who purchased their product. They listen to them on a regular basis on what is required, so to meet the standard of care. So then there's documentation or little squares or check boxes, if you will, that can be filled in that demonstrate you've met the standard of care. Now, those improvements definitely have helped a lot. I will not say that we're there yet, that it's still extremely important to use free text entry fields whenever the boxes aren't there that you want to check. Because if you're thinking that I need to find out where to put this, then it's important for it to be in the medical record somewhere. So you need to find a free text entry field to put that information in, because that is really how we were trained. We weren't, we were trained to say, this is what all is encompassing when you're doing a dressing change, or this is what we need to look at for safety for falls, or this is what we're looking at for hemodynamic monitoring if you're in a critical care, or ventilator weaning. There's a lot of things that you can't just put in a checkbox and capture everything. So we always have to, impress upon nurses that are reading, where is that piece? Because that's critical to the evaluation of care. Okay, so electronic medical records can't capture everything, where when you compare that to a handwritten medical record, you write whatever it is that you want to write. So it's very different, but we can make it happen. You just have to cognitively put the free text entry fields in where you need it to be and just put it there. That's one of the pieces that you have to do.
And some of the ability to put it there may be the responsiveness of the vendor to help.
Or character limited.
Yeah.
From the free text entry fields are character limited, so you may have to open 2 or 3 little boxes if you're having to squeeze in, a narrative that's very important. Then you just have to do that. You have to work with tools that you have, and just put it in, not give up and say, I'm not going to do that. No, you need to do that.
I think that the companies who hire nurses with nurse informatics background put themselves at a huge advantage in the marketplace, because we can explain to them why you need to have the record structured in a specific way, whereas they may be looking at this mechanistically or from an engineering perspective or an IT data perspective without necessarily seeing the clinical implications that are evident to somebody who has a nursing background.
Well, and I think it's also very important too in clinical informatics, because that is a specialty now that nurses have, and it's something that you absolutely can become very proficient at, is that it's important to still remain clinically current. And I don't mean necessarily at the bedside, but clinically current, so you can see what the nurses are being challenged with at the bedside, so that you can translate that to the vendor when they're putting their products together and making revisions or design. So that is, and it's basically the kind of same for us as legal nurses. We still need to stay clinically competent enough in the field so that we're not losing touch with what's really happening out there, because then you lose your perspective of what is expected of the nurse in her shoes, not from my perspective. It's what she's expected to do in the real live world. So we all kind of have to keep our toes in it to make certain that we are giving the best product possible, the best recommendations, the best explanations, and know where we can find the most current standards of practice to go along with what we're making recommendations for.
That is a great recommendation. And it's certainly something important to consider. If you're an expert witness, you need that clinical relevance. And what I found in the 25 years that I testified as a liability expert was that when it was appropriate, in the right circumstances, I would share lessons learned with my coworkers based on the cases that I had worked on, and it usually stopped them in their tracks. Tell me a story. Let me tell you a story about what happened when the nurses checked the blood at the nurses' station instead of at the bedside with the patient's ID. And then from there, they would look at me and their eyes would get real big, and I could see that they were never again going to walk up, especially to me, and say, "Hey, can you check this blood bag with me?" while we're standing at the nurse's station rather than standing next to the patient. I think you've emphasized a lot of great points today, Rachel, about electronic medical records, about using the appropriate tools when your business supports investing in Adobe Acrobat Pro. And I think my subscription is something like $14 a month. It's not much.
Yeah, it's not much.
Or Casemap, which is leasing the software and certainly has a suite of tools that help make it much easier to do chronologies, although you can do chronologies by word and you can mimic some of the things. It's just more tedious to do it in Word than when you have the ability to push a button in Casemap and build a report specific to particular facts. And you've also,
I recommend that to any legal nurses that are getting started, to just start with the basics. Do what you can do for free. And then as you begin to make money, then you prioritize. Because nurses that I have worked with and mentored, we do a priority list and just say, what's the most important thing for you to change when you are making enough money? Then I want to get this off my list. And then next I'm going to do this. And just do it slow, because, the businesses change, times change. And you just, if you take the time to invest when you can, smartly thinking ahead, you'll be okay.
Perfect. Any last bit of wisdom, recommendation, or tip you'd like to share?
Well, I think the most important thing that you can take away from, a session like this is all about documentation. And this is one of the things that I stress with nurses when I speak to them in an open forum is documentation is most effectively accomplished when you perform it contemporaneously. And contemporaneously basically means charting as soon as you possibly can after an event occurs. And of course, they say, well, that's pretty gray. Well, it depends on where you're working. If you're in ICU, it's going to be timely, more quick. If it's on a med-surg floor or long-term care, then it's going to be as soon as you possibly can. The thing is, you have to make that judgment call because you're in the field. But don't wait until the end of your shift, because you're going to forget and you're going to lose detail that's important to be in the medical record. So document contemporaneously. And if you're in your mind, like you're thinking that it's not in the checkbox and I'm not finding it here, then you need to find a free text entry and write it in. Or if you're in a hybrid chart, you pull out a piece of paper, date and time it, stamp it with the medical record number, and you hand write in what is necessary. Because you need to think of every time you're on shift with your case, that's like me writing a chapter in the medical record. That's my chapter that I'm responsible for, like in a book. When I get clocked in, before I clock out, I'm responsible for all the content in my chapter when I go on duty. And if you take care of that, you more than likely will not be involved in litigation, because you'll be buttoned up all in there. But you're responsible for that time period right there, as if it's my chapter in this book. Okay, so that's just kind of an easy way to think about where you're going to be held accountable to your care, and just make certain that you have good charting, good documentation of good exceptional care. So that's really what I wanted to leave with everyone.
And how can our viewer learn more about you and the services that you offer?
Well, as in the entry of this, I own the company and I've run the company Medical Legal Concepts, and it's kind of expanded over time, but Medical Legal Concepts is like the parent company of several things that I do. Nursing Impact is kind of like my soft side, so it's a place where we can kind of group and get together with online, just sharing stories and sharing recipes, and it's got some peaceful and meditation pieces to that. So Nursing Impact is a place where you can go and just kind of see who's actually there. And there's a Twitter thing that goes with Nursing Impact too, is RN Impact, that we do a lot of postings on. And then with the summit, Legal Nurse Consulting Summit, I'm real excited to be able to put together our first summit. And it's geared towards nurses that are looking to be legal nurse consultants or just interested in the legal side of healthcare, because there's going to be plenty of information on that, or legal nurses that just want to stay current with what's going on. And that's going to be airing the end of July. And then one final thing that's going to be airing about the end of that week too is Medical Legal Concepts is, put together what we call an academy. Because of all the changes that are taking place, everything's going online. All the face-to-face education that I've done in the past, I'm flipping those to be available online for anybody that would be interested. So you go to Medical Legal Concepts, you'll find everything else. It's just tucked in there somewhere.
Very nice. All right. Well, thank you so much, Rachel, for spending time with us today. And thank you to you, the viewer of this podcast on YouTube or listening to this on our audio channels. We appreciate you investing half an hour with us to hear Rachel, to think about how electronic medical records impact your role as a clinical nurse or your role as a legal nurse consultant. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Pat Iyer with Legal Nurse Podcast, and I have with me today Kathy Hicks, who is an exercise specialist, a corrective exercise specialist, and a certified personal trainer. We just finished a podcast. Kathy, tell our listener, what's the key takeaway that you're going to be sharing in your program?
Well, I think basically is for people to keep moving no matter what your age or what your size, that there are so many movements that are good for your body, and to basically keep moving, doing low impact movements to maintain your range of motion and your mobility so that you can enjoy retirement or enjoy what you love doing, like gardening. So basically, yeah, I think the biggest important thing is just keep moving and never stop trying something new.
Kathy gave some great tips in her program. You're sure to want to be able to listen to what she has to say. She makes the sounds of exercising and stretching sound enjoyable. You need to listen to what she is going to be offering in her show, so be sure to catch Kathy Hicks' podcast. And thank you for being a loyal listener to this podcast.